Silicon Valley didn't just mint products. It minted landlords, limited partners, and family offices. The Asian diaspora turned visas into equity, equity into liquidity, and liquidity into dynasties. If you value heritage and global insight, hit that subscribe button now. In this episode, we trace how stock options became homes, trusts, and multi-generational endowments. It shows how engineers Jensen Huang, Eric Yuan, Stephen Chen, and Tony Xu, and leaders like Sundar Pichai converted technical mastery into enduring financial power. We are going past hype cycles to show the wealth math, the capital bridges, and the playbook that still scales today. Wealth begins with access. After the post-1965 immigration shift, Asian engineers arrived in concentrated waves. Two forces aligned: elite education and immediate proximity to equity. That pairing matters. Salary pays bills. Equity builds balance sheets. When 2/3 of foreign-born engineers in the Valley were Asian, the probability of equity exposure and therefore wealth rose dramatically. Networks translated credentials into compounding assets. Organizations like the Chinese Institute of Engineers created mentorship loops that weren't social clubs. They were on ramps to ownership. References opened doors to teams where equity grants were meaningful. Patent coaching improved bargaining power. Boardroom rehearsal prepared rising leaders to negotiate refreshers, acceleration clauses, and governance roles. Each upgrade nudged total wealth away from wages and toward capital. Specialization accelerated this shift. Chinese talent concentrated in semiconductors and systems. Indian talent scaled software. Hardware, equity paid when cycles hit, creating step-change liquidity events. Software equity paid with faster vesting and more frequent exits. When these strengths met inside infrastructure companies, the result was concentrated cap tables held by immigrant contributors. Options exercised at split-adjusted prices later turned into down payments, tuition funds, and seed checks. Role models normalized the transition from skill to stake, and Wang showed invention could mature into enterprise value. Jerry Yang signaled mainstream power for immigrant founders. David Sun's memory business framed how operational excellence turns into durable cash flows. Min Kao proved navigation tech could scale into a global platform. Their outcomes were not just inspirational, they were financial templates for estate planning, charitable vehicles, and intergenerational education budgets. Then came the modern standard bearers. Sundar Pichai's ascent demonstrated how executive equity, performance grants, and long-term incentive plans can rival founder-level outcomes when compounding over time. Lisa Su illustrated that turnaround success can translate into transformative wealth through performance-based stock. Jensen Huang's path at Nvidia showed the apex case, where founder equity held through a platform inflection distributed massive value to employees and early supporters across the diaspora. Consider the engineer-to-founder code through a wealth lens. The steps were consistent. Learn in corporate research and development. Earn credibility where equity is issued. Spin out with technical moats. Secure design partners. Scale revenue and governance discipline. Each milestone increased valuation. Each valuation step expanded the family balance sheet. Importantly, liquidity management evolved. Early secondaries de-risked life needs. Later tranches funded property, diversified portfolios, and ultimately family offices. Community capital closed the loop. Diaspora angels wrote the first checks, often after their own option wins. Their value was speed and context, knowing when a founder was underselling traction or mispricing risk. That capital was not just friendly, it was catalytic. It kept ownership local, compounded within the community, and funded the next cohort. Alumni syndicates formed. Operator funds emerged. These investors favored momentum over pedigree, rewarding proof with better terms and preserving founder control longer. More control meant better wealth outcomes at exit. Wealth mechanics showed up at the micro level too. Option holders timed exercises to tax windows. Couples coordinated vest schedules against mortgage plans. Parents laddered 5 and 29 style education vehicles with proceeds from partial liquidations. Families formed trusts to hold concentrated stock, separating voting rights from distributions. Over time, this professionalized into family offices managing public equities, real estate, and venture positions in parallel. The result was a more family approach to sustaining wealth across generations. The normalization effect is visible across examples. Eric Yuan transformed a utility into a platform, and employees rode that arc to meaningful liquidity. Stephen Chen helped create a new media highway and converted that into long-term capital. Tony Xu blended software and operations, establishing equity value that funded property and philanthropy. James Park turned disciplined consumer hardware into an ecosystem that rewarded early teams with life-changing outcomes. Different sectors, same wealth math: technical credibility, defensible IP, distribution leverage, and equity that compounds. Think of the ecosystem like a trade route for capital. Once the route was laid through immigration pipelines, mentorship scaffolding, and venture bridges, wealth moved predictably along it. The tolls were vesting schedules and dilution. The cargo was stock that converted into homes, endowments, and investment portfolios. Moving forward, the core logic holds. Talent density creates access to equity. Networks improve the terms of that equity. And disciplined liquidity turns paper gains into generational wealth. Wealth at infrastructure scale begins with a founder who holds. Nvidia is that blueprint. Jensen Huang arrived with the conviction that architecture choices are balance sheet choices. Specialized graphics processors would not only win frames, they would mint cash flows if paired with the right software, developer loyalty, and cadence. The result was not just a product, it was a toll road for compute, where Nvidia set the tariff. The wealth engine activated in stages. Performance mattered first. Performance leadership created pricing power. When a chip delivers step-change throughput, customers accept premium margins. Second, a stable software layer, an operating system for accelerated compute, locked in developers. Build once, optimize once, and every new hardware cycle multiplies prior effort. Third, supply alignment turned launches into events. Data centers planned power, cooling, and capacity around Nvidia's roadmap, concentrating demand into predictable, high-value bursts. Each step increased gross margin, free cash flow, and market value. Now translate that into personal and community wealth. Founder equity compounds when the moat gets deeper each generation. Long holding periods convert volatility into staircase gains. Executive grants for key leaders, refreshed against rising baselines, create fortunes parallel to founder stakes. Early employees with options experience life-changing liquidity when platform effects become consensus. That liquidity does not vanish. It moves into real estate, diversified portfolios, angel checks, and eventually family offices. The Diaspora signal mattered. Seeing Jensen Huang command both architecture and markets reframed what was possible. It validated infrastructure ambition for immigrant founders who might have settled for feature layers. It normalized the idea that you can sit at the intersection of physics, software, and finance, and keep ownership. That norm spills over. Sundar Pichai showed executive equity can rival founder wealth when scaled across a global platform. Lisa Su demonstrated performance stock tied to operational excellence can deliver generational outcomes. The through line is mastery plus patience equals outsized equity. Consider the Nvidia flywheel through a wealth lens. Hardware leadership pulls in customers. Software stability keeps them. Developer ecosystems create switching costs. Scarcity during high-demand cycles increases pricing power. Each turn drives revenue per customer up and acquisition costs down. That delta flows straight to valuation. When you anchor a category, your stock becomes the currency for acquisitions, retention, and compensation. That currency, carefully issued, becomes multi-generational capital for thousands of families. There is also a discipline to wealth protection. Nvidia resisted chasing every adjacent market. Focus preserved margins and maintained partner trust. Focus also reduced dilution pressure, with fewer distractions, fewer expensive pivots, and fewer emergency raises. With cleaner cap tables, more upside accrues to founders, executives, and early teams. In parallel, tax-aware programs allowed employees to exercise, hold, and diversify over time. Secondary windows provided life liquidity without surrendering the core position. The ripple effects run through the diaspora economy. Option gains funded diaspora angel networks that understand deep tech claims. Alumni invested in the next Eric Yuan building reliable communication at scale, or the next Stephen Chen M enabling new media distribution. Operator capital backed Tony Hsu's blend of software and logistics, and James Park's disciplined consumer hardware. The pattern repeats. Wealth from an infrastructure winner becomes seed fuel for new categories, keeping opportunity inside the community and upgrading the next cohort's odds. Think about property as the first conversion layer. Employees turn a tranche of options into primary homes and rental units, shifting from earned income to asset income. Founders and executives escalate to commercial real estate and land, using credit lines against appreciated stock for tax-efficient diversification. Over time, those holdings stabilize family cash flow across cycles. Layer on passive positions in broad market funds, direct venture allocations, and philanthropic vehicles, and you have a durable wealth portfolio anchored by a single compounding equity story. Risk management sits beside ambition. Teams mapped export controls, procurement dependencies, and geopolitical exposure early. That made the platform investable for institutions and safe for long-term employee holdings. Clear governance, predictable disclosure, and consistent cadence reduced discount rates in the market. Lower perceived risk raises valuation for the same earnings, which raises the value of every share on every family's ledger. What should you take from Nvidia if you care about wealth, not just tech? Build where performance buys pricing power. Wrap your core with software that compounds. Court developers like customers and customers like owners. Hold through real inflections. Use secondaries for life, not for lifestyle. Convert equity into property and diversified assets on a schedule, not a whim. Reinvest in the community that sharpened you. That is how an immigrant vision becomes a dynasty. When you shift the lens from innovation to accumulation, the immigrant to unicorn story becomes a wealth machine with repeatable steps. The outcome isn't just a company valuation. It's founder-controlled equity, employee options converting to property, and alumni liquidity seeding the next generation. The pipeline starts with technical credibility, but it compounds through ownership discipline and liquidity strategy. First, credibility earns terms that protect upside. Founders who have shipped core systems, optimized chip yields, or scaled distributed software do more than close design partners. They negotiate cleaner capitalization and tighter boards. Cleaner capitalization preserves founder stakes, and tighter boards reduce dilution from reactive pivots. The effect is simple. Every milestone lifts not just the valuation, but the percentage of it that flows to families rather than the market. Second, distribution speed compresses time to proof, which compresses time to liquidity. Launching through cloud marketplaces, developer communities, or app platforms creates early revenue signals. Those signals unlock better-priced rounds and optionality for secondaries. Early secondaries cover life needs without surrendering control. Later secondaries diversify into real assets. Over time, founders and early employees ladder out of concentration risk while preserving the core position that can still multiply. Third, defensible intellectual property sustains pricing power. Whether it is algorithms, data pipelines, silicon architectures, or regulated workflows, the asset that customers cannot easily replace becomes a toll booth. Toll booths throw off cash or command premium multiples. That premium fuels grants for retention, refreshes for executives, and currency for strategic acquisitions. Each grant and acquisition expands the circle of owners who can convert paper into durable capital. You can see the pattern in familiar names. Eric Yuan built a reliability moat in communication, and his platform's consistency created a valuation that lifted employees into home ownership and investing. Stephen Chen helped lay the rails for online video distribution, converting that inflection into long-horizon capital. Tony Xu paired software with operations, forging equity value that underwrote property, philanthropy, and early-stage investments. James Park turned consumer hardware discipline into an ecosystem outcome that rewarded early teams with meaningful liquidity. The details differ, but the wealth math rhymes. Leadership at scale follows the same mechanics. Sundar Pichai's role shows how executive equity granted against expanding platforms can rival founder outcomes when compounded over years. Performance stock tied to durable growth becomes family capital, not just salary. That normalization matters. It tells ambitious immigrants that you can lead at the top and still build a dynasty through equity programs, long-term incentives, and disciplined vesting. Now, how does the pipeline convert velocity into balance sheets? It runs through 4 phases. Phase 1. Skill to stake. Technical founders parlay credibility into ownership. They keep the capitalization simple, define governance early, and anchor on metrics that attract terms instead of concessions. Diaspora angels and operator syndicates move fast, translating underplayed traction into conviction. Ownership stays closer to the founding circle. Phase 2. Traction to terms. Design partners validate use cases and revenue signals arrive. Financing shifts from belief to evidence. That shift lowers dilution and increases the room for employee option pools. Well-structured pools are wealth engines. They create hundreds of new owners with aligned incentives and future liquidity. Phase 3. Liquidity to assets. As valuations scale, founders and employees use secondaries and public events to convert a portion of equity into property, diversified portfolios, and charitable vehicles. Mortgage ladders replace rent. Rental units add passive income. Indexed funds absorb volatility. Donor-advised structures and scholarships convert prestige into community lift. Phase 4. Assets to ecosystem. Alumni angel checks fund the next cohort. Family offices back specialist funds in AI, semiconductors, fintech, and healthcare. Over time, stock options become homes, trusts, family offices, and community capital, and that cycle preserves upside across generations. Operator-led diligence raises the bar, rewarding proof over pedigree. That financing culture preserves ownership for builders and keeps more upside inside the diaspora. Sector clusters amplify this arc. In SaaS, systems thinking produces workflow tools that embed deeply, sustaining subscription cash flows and premium multiples. In semiconductors, architecture choices and supply mastery deliver scarcity value that translates to high-margin equity. In enterprise AI, inference economics, including latency, cost, and privacy, create defensible positions that fund robust option plans. In fintech and healthcare, regulatory know-how becomes a moat that commands better pricing and longer contracts, strengthening compensation plans and retention. Risk management is part of the pipeline. Founders scope export controls, data residency, and ownership thresholds early, preventing future financing blockages. That foresight protects company value and personal wealth. Clean structures make shares easier to finance against, easier to donate, and easier to pass into trusts. If you are building today and want the wealth outcome, not just the press, lead with proof. Keep the capitalization table tight and the board small until evidence compels expansion. Treat employee equity like community building. Grant meaningfully, educate on exercising, and plan tax windows. Use secondaries for life stability, not lifestyle inflation. Convert in tranches, home, rentals, diversified funds, then targeted venture. Teach heirs the decision process, not just the asset list. The pipeline is repeatable because it is structural. Technical credibility earns ownership. Distribution speed earns time. Defensible intellectual property earns pricing power. Governance earns durability. Together, they convert immigrant ambition into billion-dollar companies, and those companies into multi-generational wealth. Follow the money, and you will see how wealth moved from option tables to family offices. Asian-linked limited partners and venture firms did not just wire funds, they built bridges that converted paper gains into durable assets. Deep tech investors with Asian roots focused on semiconductors, AI, and life sciences, offering diligence that tested claims under real constraints. That lowered technical risk, raised valuation confidence, and preserved founder ownership. More ownership at higher prices equals better wealth outcomes for founders, executives, and option holders. Strategic corporate investors from Asia normalized a different playbook. Cash came bundled with supply chain access, preferred pricing, and co-development. For hardware-heavy or regulated startups, that collapsed time to revenue. Faster revenue improved terms in subsequent rounds. Better terms meant less dilution. Less dilution meant more equity. Stayed with the people building the company, and more equity became property, portfolios, and philanthropy later. Healthcare-focused funds with US and Asia footprints bridged clinical trials and commercialization. Founders gained sites, patient access, and regulatory guidance, turning scientific milestones into predictable cash flows. Predictability attracts growth capital at stronger multiples. Those multiples are not abstract. They become down payments, endowments, and the seed capital of the next generation's ventures. Diaspora general partners amplified this effect. Shared context improved signal quality. When a founder quietly buried a crucial metric, these general partners surfaced it, accelerating conviction without performative pitching. Speed at seed and Series A matters. It locks in valuation, protects caps, and lets founders recruit with meaningful option pools. Those pools are the broadest wealth distribution mechanism in Silicon Valley. Every employee who exercises into liquidity becomes a homeowner, an angel, or both. Regulatory rigor sat at the center of the bridge. Cross-border capital came with export control checks, data residency plans, and clean governance. That discipline kept companies eligible for sensitive customers and future financings. Risk-adjusted value rose. A higher multiple on the same revenue multiplies every family's ledger without increasing hours worked. Then wealth formalized. Secondary sales allowed early employees to stabilize life, mortgages, education funds, and emergency reserves while staying long the core position. Founders layered trusts, holding companies, and family offices. Portfolios diversified across public equities, income real estate, and targeted venture. Some allocated to deep tech funds with Asian ties, completing the loop, community wealth recycling into community opportunity. The blueprint is practical. Mix institutional venture with diaspora angels and strategic corporates. Negotiate for distribution, not just dollars. Document governance, so speed does not become chaos. Educate employees on equity and taxes. Map geopolitical exposure before it becomes a financing obstacle. The outcome is compounding ownership that survives market cycles and passes cleanly to heirs. And the signals from leaders matter. When Jensen Huang, Sundar Pichai, Lisa Su, Eric Yuan, Stephen Chen, Tony Xu, and James Park show that equity and discipline fund homes, grants, and new ventures, the next cohort upgrades its ambition. Wealth becomes a system, not a story. Here's the single takeaway. The Asian diaspora didn't just build category leaders. It built a capital system where equity turns into property, portfolios, and family institutions, and then recycles into the next founder's first check. Which lever speaks to you, ownership discipline, capital bridges, or liquidity to asset strategy? Join the conversation and subscribe to continue exploring the Asian impact on the world.